Greetings. Thank you for tuning into this video. Over the years, particularly the last few decades, kept hearing a lot of negative things about Christopher Columbus, and I decided to do a little research on it myself. I picked up a book that I thought might help, and I also went back to ship's logs, the actual ship's logs from Columbus's trip, to kind of better understand what happened, and also trying to understand, why is that colleges and the media propagate, such untruths about Columbus? Because it turns out that he has been denigrated very unfairly. So let's go through this presentation and take a look at how Christopher Columbus, what his behaviors were like and what his attitude was like based on ship's logs, which is really all we have. We have the ship's logs and not much else, and some other commentary here and there historically, but not much else. And I'll show you that some things were actually, some negative things about Columbus were actually completely manufactured falsehoods. So let's start with Howard Zinn. Howard Zinn wrote a book some years ago called The People's History of the United States. And unfortunately, it's a pretty fictitious book. He completely fabricated stories about Columbus, hacking off the hands of the Arawak natives, and denigrated this historic person. Zinn also took comments out of context, Columbus's comments out of context, and relied on stories from a book that had absolutely no references. And he propagated other untruths. Zinn also denigrates the American founders in his book, and even questions the legitimacy of the United States. But why? Do a little research on Howard Zinn and why he wrote a book like this, People's History, which is over to the right, the cover of the book. FBI file number 100-360217 states, Zinn was an active member of the Communist Party of the United States. The author, Martin Duberman, in his book Howard Zinn, A Life on the Left, documented that Zinn was an anarchist and quoted Zinn saying, "Yes, I am something of a Marxist." So that explains where his head's coming from. He's anti-American, anti-capitalist, and he's denigrating the American founders, our history, and very unfair, one-sided view of the United States' history, including lots of fictitious accounts as well. Since 1980, Zinn's book has an appeal to many leftist academics and is used in many American history university courses. So many students have seen this book and have been influenced by Zinn's view of the world, or view of the United States. Yet Zinn's book does not conform with the American Historical Association's documentation standards. A lot of it is said or implied without facts, but it leaves the reader, with a very negative connotation about American history. Here comes Mary Grabar to the rescue. So Mary Grabar wrote a book called Debunking Howard Zinn, and basically exposes the fake history that he promulgated about Columbus, Lincoln, Jefferson, slavery, World War II, Vietnam, lots of things in this book. It's really a very interesting book. Columbus, American founders are criticized and denigrated by using concepts of presentism. And aside from Howard Zinn, this concept of presentism, judging people who lived centuries ago by today's standards, and not considering the context in which they've lived. Slavery was an economic model for centuries. To say that, America has been, has a black soul or a dark side to it because it had slavery, we actually eliminate slavery within 80 years. From when the Constitution of the United States was founded in the 1780s to around the 1860s, about 80 years transpired. In one generation, we eliminated slavery completely. And during our growth, we had the Northwest Passage, the Northwest Alliance, which basically said you couldn't have any slavery as the country expanded to the West. And our founders knew that slavery was wrong, and they couldn't figure out how to get rid of it quickly without being attacked by foreigners, as we were a weak young country, or having a slave revolt, which we've seen in other countries. So there were issues, and they had to work through it. But in 80 years, in one generation, we eliminated slavery completely from the Constitution, a very bloody civil war that resolved that issue. Let's get back to Columbus now. So Mary Grabar's book's very good. She has over 50 pages of references, each page with a few dozen references. Nevertheless, let's check Columbus's ship's logs. And here's a photo from the museum of what his logs look like. Now, there was a British geographer and explorer, a famous gentleman named Sir Clement Robert Markham. And he was a well-known geographer, explorer. He was the president of the Royal Geographical Society in England. He was an explorer. And he went through the logs, pictured above me, and went through and wrote this book, which you can find in this archive website right here, archive.org. And the book is about Columbus and also about John Cabot, Giovanni Cabato, and others. But the first almost 200 pages, from 1 to 196, exclusively covers Columbus and his trip and his voyages. So I've gone through the logs myself and annotated exactly each day. October 11th, land was sighted. 3 ships anchored on October 12th. And here's Columbus's words. That we might, this author, Sir Markham, is speaking about what Columbus wrote in the book. And he says, the admiral in his book wrote that we might form a great friendship and that we might more easily freed and converted our holy faith by love rather than force. So he said, I knew that there were people who could be more easily freed and converted to our holy faith by love than by force. So he wasn't looking to forcibly make them Christians. Did want to make them Christians. That was the way of the world back then, for Europe and for Spain. And made them so much our friends that was marvel to see. And he claims, he shows they brought us threads and skeins and darts and other things, and we gave them glass beads and bells. In fine, they took all and gave what they had with goodwill. It was a race of people very poor in everything. And I have the page numbers from Sir Markham's book, so you can go back if you want to, get more information about this in context. 2 months later, December 22nd, he writes, but in the hope that these people would become Christians through the willingness they show, and that they will be subjects of the sovereigns of Castile, Spain, and that he, Columbus, now holds them to be so, and that he may serve, and that they may serve with love. He wished and endeavored to please them. So he was trying to convert them to Christianity. There's no doubt about it, and he wanted them to be, subjects of Spain. No question about that. He also had to report back to the king and queen, what's happening. He wants to show the successes, that will support the kingdom of Spain. December 22nd continued on the next page. So this is 2 months after the landing. He said that the admiral saw there was simplicity in these Indians and said nothing should be received from them unless something had been given in exchange. He didn't want to take things from them. He wanted to have an exchange and have goodwill and have a good relationship. And he said that these people were truly believing that the Christians had come from heaven. So they considered themselves fortunate to be holding of them, of the people who arrived with Columbus. And on this day, December 22nd, more than 120 canoes came in ships full of people, bringing bread, fish, fresh water. They had a good relationship, it sounds like. They also brought seeds and good kinds and grain, and this is again on page 128. 2 days later, he says that I believe that no one should see them could. I believe that no one who should see them could say less than what I have said. And I repeat, that the things of these great villages of the island of Hispaniola is what he called it, which they call the natives, I'm going to ruin this, but Bohio, B-O-H-I-O, are wonderful. All here have a loving manner and gentle speech, unlike the others who seem to be menacing when they speak. So there were other natives from another island we'll learn more about as we proceed in the log that were, cannibals and a bit more problematic towards the local Indians that where Columbus had landed his ships. On Christmas Day, he lost one of his ships, and the king wept when he heard the news, and he sent all his people with large canoes to unload the ship. He himself, with brothers and relations, were actively assisting unloading the ship. Properly guarded, he said the people who came with the king were weeping. They felt sorry for the Admiral Columbus. They wanted to console him. They were obviously had a good relationship. And they took care of the property they unloaded from the ship. He says, for there was not even a needle missing. December 25th continues. The king ordered the property be stored in some houses. Loving people without covetousness, and fit for anything. I assure you, your highness," writing to the king now, "there is no better land nor people. They love their neighbors as themselves, and their speech is the sweetest and the gentlest in the world. They have good customs among themselves. The king has a remarkable presence, self-contained manner, a pleasure to see." They obviously had a good relationship. On the 26th, again, they're speaking about the way the property was handled in 2 large houses and how well they helped them. So honest they are, says the admiral, without any covetousness. Again, he says, covetousness for the goods of others, and so above all, that virtuous king. He's speaking very well of how they have with their relationship. The chief knew nothing about arms, as they neither have them nor use them. Thought this was a wonderful thing. He, however, began to talk of those of the Kabu. These are whom they call the Kabiks. They come to capture the natives. They have bows and arrows without iron. But the admiral says that the sovereigns of Castile would order the Caribs to be destroyed. He tells the king, my sovereign, my king of Spain, the sovereigns of Castile would order these cannibals to be destroyed. And that he ordered a Lombard, one of his sailors, to shoot off a gun, which, they were astonished and they fell to the ground in astonishment. So they felt that they may be protected by these Christians who've come from far away to save them and protect them from these Caribs who are cannibals. The Cacique showed much love for the admiral and great sorrow at his departure, especially when he saw him go on board. Now, further, Mary Grabar writes that in Debunking Howard Zinn, that there were these Talamanca Indians wanted to trade with the Spaniards. And to break down sales resistance, the Indians sent on board 2 virgins, 2 girls, one about 8 and one about 12, according to the ship's logs. Columbus had the girls fed, clothed, and sent back, leaving the natives astonished at the continence of the Spaniards. So Columbus didn't want this abuse of these girls, and clothed them, fed them, and sent them back to the natives who were astonished that they turned down this gift of the girls to them, as they were trying to trade and wanted some advantage by using these girls to get some advantage in the trade. She also writes, Mary Grabar, that in the world of 1492, it was a very different norms, of course, than today. And Columbus did have some difficulty controlling his crew. Some were Spaniards who resented that their admiral, Columbus, was a foreigner from Genoa. Some of the crew were accused of cruelty, and I'm sure it was true, towards the Indians. Similarly, some of the crew were killed by the natives and presumably eaten by the island's cannibals when Columbus was forced to leave men behind when one of his ships had sunk. So one of his ships sunk, couldn't take all his crew back. When he returned, they were presumably eaten. So, this was a different world for both sides. It wasn't like, the Spaniards were evil and the Indians weren't, or vice versa. It was a wild, wild world without a lot of law and order, and it was a cruel world. It was a world of conquer. And even the Indians conquered each other's lands and each other's tribes. Sadly, Zinn offers a very one-sided fictional account of New World interactions, especially personally attacking Columbus and creating a very false and sinister caricature. So as you can see from the logs, Columbus was trying to have a good relationship. Looks like they were well liked. They wanted them to protect them from the cannibals who evidently must have killed and eaten the crew he left behind. Is that bad? That's just the way the world was. That's how that tribe lived. That's how they existed. That was their culture. Now let's examine Zinn's writings and the alleged quotes of Columbus. Zinn wrote, "Hack off the hands of the Arawaks," that Columbus had done that, and had accounts of raped women, enslaved people, worked to death for the sake of the white Europeans' lust for gold. Let's see, where he gets that from, if he does at all. Zinn claims Columbus said they would make fine servants. Let's start with that. So he took this out of context. Here's the truth. And they gave me to understand that people, now this is from the logs, that Columbus is writing in his logs, and they gave me to understand that people from other adjacent islands came with the intentions of seizing them, and that they defended themselves. I believe and still believe that they come here from the mainland to take them prisoners. They should be good servants and intelligent. For what I observed, they look quickly around and they understand what's being said. I believe they could easily be made Christians, and it appeared to me that they had no religion. So when Columbus talks about the way Zinn says they would make fine servants, out of context, it sounds like Columbus wants to make servants of them. But really, he's saying these folks on another tribe takes them prisoners, and I think they would make good servants. They seem to be a kind and intelligent people. But he's really talking in context of how they might be a useful servant to this other tribe, and then continues to say, well, I could probably make them easily Christians, and they don't seem to have a religion. So you have to put it into context. You have to put it into context of the time as well. Zinn claims Columbus said, with 50 men we could subjugate them and make them do whatever we want. Again, he changes the wording and give it a more sinister sound. The truth, from the logs, it says, that I might be able to give a full account to your highness, the king and highnesses, king and queen of Spain, and also where a fortress might be established, for with 50 men they can all be subjugated and made to do what is required of them. So essentially what he's telling the king is, we can put a fort here, we should put a fort here, and we could probably subjugate these people to do what we need to get the fort built. The natives make war on each other, although these are very simple-minded and handsomely formed people. The fort would probably provide some stability. So again, he's sort of twisting the language a bit. Of course, they would subjugate them. They would expect them to be subjects of Spain, and they might want them to work. But to say he worked them to death for the white man's gold is kind of out of context and kind of an exaggeration of what was going on. The century's context must be considered. And at that time, colonization was common. Slavery was the normal economic system on all continents for thousands of years. And sadly, slavery is still practiced today in some Muslim nations, Africa, and China. So that concludes. I hope this helps portray Columbus in a more realistic light in terms of what happened, and better explains how Zinn has sort of twisted, and really in a fictitious way changed what Columbus's interactions were, with the peoples in this new world. And we can make other videos on, how fictitious his book, The People's History of America, was towards the American founders. Also, problematic in terms of that book. Unfortunately, it's been used by many in academia and has, affected the thinking of many in this country. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this, and put your comments below. These are just my thoughts. If you have other information, other books you want me to look at, or other references, please put them in the comments. I'd love to see them, and thank you again for listening.